I also caught up with Sir Suma Chakrabarti, the chair of the Board of Trustees of ODI, on the sidelines of the Kautilya Economic Conclave, which was addressed by Prime Minister Modi and Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman last week. Now, a host of dignitaries, economic experts visited India to speak about India's growth story in the current geopolitical environment. Sir Suma Chakrabarti said that MDB reform process needs concerted action. India can definitely lead the way in MDB reform, but at the same time, India should not be dependent on Western countries when it comes to financing its energy transition needs. Why did he say that? Listen in.
The policy framework for development in India is going in the right direction. I can talk particularly about the energy sector. Prime Minister Modi made this very ambitious target for how India should move towards net zero, and India is actually implementing the policies but also the investments required. So, for example, I sit on the board of Renew Energy Global PLC, India's biggest independent power producer, focused on renewable energy. Why are we making so much progress with our investments and our operations? Because the policy framework's in the right place, and therefore there's a lot more scope for investment in renewable energy. And we're not alone. I mean, there are plenty of other companies moving into that area as well. So that sector is a very good example of what can happen. Clearly, there's a lot more to do to try and create jobs. So I think we need a much more labor-intensive development model in this country, and that's very clear in certain parts of the country. But I think that's all in train now. So I'm actually quite optimistic. If you look at the growth rate of India, you know, as long as we can maintain 7–8% a year, that's historically unheard of in this country for a long period. And that's what we should really aim for.
Right. Now, coming to the issue of energy transition, that's a big priority for India right now, and it's a priority around the world, and the conversation will grow louder as we move into the next COP. What is the ambition and the voice that we need to hear from developing countries, and what's the expectation we should have from the developed nations this time around?
I think fundamentally we have to change the conversation. I think for many, many years there's been this idea that we're all going to do this together, we're all going to try and change together. Of course, that's still the ideal situation. But as you can see, countries are moving at different paces on this. I just gave the example of India moving very fast on renewable energy, potentially green hydrogen as well. I think, therefore, the idea of the reciprocity, that everyone else has to take action at the same time, is likely to be quite difficult to achieve. If you look at what's happening in the West and the advanced economies, you know, the business models, the economic models are looking much more inward, more protectionist, more difficult, I think, for them then to think, oh, well, it's part of our job also to provide resources for developing countries. Yes, they will continue to do some, but probably not in the same volume that we had hoped for in the past. Now, a country like India, I think, has the capacity, the size of economy, you know, it is one of the largest economies in the world, to just get on with this without hoping that someone else is going to also be involved in this. We should, ideally, of course, we should try and get investment from abroad as much as possible, but particularly from the private sector. But the idea of many large public sector resources coming from Western governments into India, I think, frankly, that is going to be quite tough in the current fiscal situation and economic models that the West is beginning to pursue. So I would encourage India just to really make the transition of its own will and accord. And it can do that.
Right.
It's already showing it's going to do that.
Speaking about MDB reform, we had seen a big push for that when the G20 took place in India last year. There were several papers which were brought out on how the MDB reform can be carried out, how the investment capability of multilateral investment banks, multilateral financial institutions can be increased. Where do you think we have reached as far as that reform process is concerned?
Well, first of all, the first thing to say is one of the great hallmarks, successes of the Indian G20 presidency was this great report by the independent experts groups, co-chaired by N.K. Singh of India and Larry Summers of the United States. And it was a fantastic piece of work, and it was supported by my organization, ODI Global. We did a lot of work for that thing, and it set out a great agenda of reform. What needs to be bigger, bolder, better. And in some areas, there have been some implementation successes. I think there's been some movement forward on some of the, what we call capital adequacy, making sure that the institutions, the MDBs, have sufficient capital. We've done things like hybrid capital in one or two places like African Development Bank. I think we're having a better conversation with the rating agencies and so on. Even there, though, I think overall, on the amount of capital we really need big capital increases for these multilateral banks. Otherwise, they won't be able to lend as much as we want them to lend. Right. And not just for climate, of course, but also for other things too.
On that note, we take a short break, but don't go anywhere. News and updates continue on CNBC TV18, even as we come to the end of News Center.